December 18th, 1944, north of Kyushu, Japan, 24,000 feet. Captain Marcus Hale had flown 23 missions in the B-29 Silver Monarch, but none of them had prepared him for the sky over Japan that morning. The bomber vibrated with the slow, rhythmic shudder of 4 Wright R-3350 engines pushed beyond their recommended cruise limits. Frost crept along the edges of the cockpit glass like ivory lacework, shimmering against the first pale streaks of sunrise. Below them, Japan slept beneath a blanket of winter haze, but Hale knew the peace was an illusion. Somewhere inside that haze, somewhere ahead, the most feared anti-aircraft system in the home islands was waiting for them. Type 2 Mark II radar, nicknamed by American intelligence as J-band killer. A Japanese microwave radar the Americans had long believed to be myth, but 2 weeks earlier, a B-29 had limped back to Saipan, with holes punched clean through its fuselage, holes arranged in patterns, almost geometric. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. That report went straight to XXI Bomber Command. The conclusion chilled every crewman to the bone. Japan had radar-directed anti-aircraft guns capable of predicting B-29 flight paths, and on this mission, Hale's crew was headed straight into the largest cluster of them. The morning briefing inside the massive Quonset hut on Isley Field had felt unusually tense. Crews sat packed shoulder to shoulder, wool jackets pulled tight, frost-stiffened breath hanging in the dark as a projector snapped to life. Colonel Bradshaw tapped the map with a pointer. Omura Aircraft Manufacturing Plant, primary producer of key 84 engine blocks. Heavy defences, overlapping radar screens, multiple altitude guns between 15,000 and 28,000 feet. Someone whistled low. Omura was one of the most feared targets in Japan, Bradshaw continued. The enemy has improved their fire control systems. Expect radar-coordinated barrages. Radar-coordinated. The word every B-29 crewman dreaded. Then came the part that made Hale twitch. Routes will be flown in standard bomber stream formation. No deviations. Maintain assigned altitude. Maintain assigned spacing. Hale leaned toward his co-pilot. Lieutenant Fred Kilroy. "This is insane," he whispered. "If they know our altitude and spacing, they'll plot the whole stream like it's laid out on graph paper," Kilroy muttered back. Standard doctrine required B-29 seconds to fly staggered stream formations for fuel efficiency and target saturation. It worked against optical gunners. It worked against early radars. But against predictive fire control? Against a system that could track an entire formation, calculate lead angles, predict climb, drift, and deceleration? It was suicide. But Bomber Command didn't budge an inch. Inside Silver Monarch, every man grappled with a different flavor of dread. Tech Sergeant Joe Sparks Montero, radar operator, sat hunched at his APQ-13 station. He was one of the few men in the Pacific with deep experience on microwave systems, and he had studied every scrap of intelligence on Japan's new J-band. He knew what they were up against. He knew microwave radar didn't care about clouds or darkness. He knew it didn't need visual confirmation. He knew it could lock onto a B-29 the size of a city bus at 20 miles. And worst of all, Japanese Type 2 guns could elevate from horizon to zenith in 3 seconds. No human gunner could match that, but a radar director could. Every calculation Montero understood told him the same thing. If they stayed in stream formation, the radar would kill them in order. Like dominoes. Further back in the fuselage, Sergeant Alvin Burke, tail gunner, tightened the fur collar around his neck. He had fought against German fighters in the ETO earlier in the war and transferred to B-29 seconds after an engine fire ended his tour with the 8th Air Force. Burke knew the look of flak that missed because of human imperfection bursts a few hundred yards too low, too high, drifting with wind shear. He also knew the look of flak that was mathematically placed. On Mission 12 to Tokyo, he had seen bursts rise along a perfect curve climbing toward the bombers with a mechanical inevitability. Not gunners firing, he had whispered then, but something sensing us. Now, Facing the threat again, he prayed silently. Don't let today be the day the machines get it right. 2 hours after takeoff, the B-29 seconds leveled into their assigned lanes. The bomber stream stretched across the sky like a gleaming silver highway, more than 200 aircraft in tight, predictable columns. The Silver Monarch held position at 24,000 feet, third element, second box. Hale watched contrails braid above them, below them, ahead of them. We're flying like parade floats, Kilroy said. Radar's going to eat us alive. We stick to orders, Hale replied stiffly. Even if they're insane. Behind them, a sudden burst of static crackled through interphone. Then Montero's voice, low and unsettling. Skipper. Getting returns. Hale stiffened. At this range? Faint. Narrow band. They're sweeping us already. Impossible. They were still 60 miles from Omura, but then the radar screen flickered again, stronger this time, a thin vertical spike cutting through the murky green glow. Montero swallowed hard. They've got long-range microwaves. Strong ones. Kilroy cursed under his breath. They weren't supposed to have anything like this. American analysts believed Japan couldn't generate enough microwave power to track high-altitude B-29 seconds until late 1945, and even then, only in small numbers. But the spike on Montero's screen didn't care about American intelligence. It cared only about the hundreds of gleaming aluminum targets lumbering across the Japanese coastline. 20 minutes later, the bomber stream crossed the shoreline, and the sky exploded. Not gradually. Not in seconds. Instantly. One moment, peaceful winter sky. Next moment, a curtain of black flak blooming in mathematically perfect rows. Shells burst not randomly, but in patterns, cubes, grids, spirals advancing like the steps of an invisible machine calculating three-dimensional death. A B-29 2 miles ahead took 3 direct hits within the span of a heartbeat. Flame erupted from its starboard wing. It rolled, snapped, and spiraled downward like a comet breaking apart. Jesus, Kilroy whispered. They hit it without even bracketing. Burke, watching from the rear blister, saw something even worse. They're adjusting before the bomber even moves, meaning the radar wasn't tracking where the bomber was. It was tracking where it would be, a predictive solution, just like the SCR-584, but operated by Japan. Montero slammed a fist onto the side of his console. They're reading our formation spacing. It's all pre-calculated. This whole sky is mapped. Hale felt ice crawl up his spine. They know our altitude, spacing, and drift. They don't even need to see us. Kilroy turned sharply. Captain, with all due respect, if we don't get out of this formation, we're dead. Hale didn't reply, because he knew it was true. But breaking formation, especially before reaching the IP, was a court-martial offense. One pilot disobeying might survive. But breaking formation disrupted timing, spacing, bomb pattern, escort coverage, and could doom dozens of other planes. Yet staying in formation meant letting radar-guided guns pick them off like clockwork. The sky ahead grew worse. Flak bursts doubled, then tripled. Row after row of geometric shrapnel spheres climbed toward the formation, and each burst was closer, more precise. Every few seconds, another bomber vanished in a blossom of flame. Inside the Silver Monarch, oxygen masks hid the terror on every face. Then, Montero said something no one expected. Captain, I think I know how to beat this radar. Hale twisted around. Explain. To track us, their radar needs predictable geometry, spacing, speed, altitude. We're flying the perfect equation. And? Kilroy pressed. Montero licked his lips. And if we make our section's geometry impossible to calculate, they'll lose the solution. Burke asked the obvious question. How the hell do we do that? Montero inhaled. We fly illegal formation. Everyone stared. Illegal? Kilroy echoed. Not random, Montero said quickly, but asymmetrical. Constant micro-variations, a shifting diamond instead of a fixed line. Not enough to collide, not enough to disrupt the stream, but enough to break the radar's three-dimensional model. Hale squinted. That isn't a tactic. That's suicide by court-martial. It's either that, Montero said quietly, or we die by mathematics. The flak grew louder, a steady, grinding thunder that shook the fuselage. Another B-29 ahead disintegrated, another to the right lost a wing, a third vanished into a cloud of flame as shrapnel pierced fuel tanks. They were running out of minutes, maybe seconds. Kilroy leaned closer to Hale. Captain, if we break spacing a few 100 feet, we'll be alone. They'll lose our coordinates in the formation model, Burke added. And if it works for us, maybe it works for the whole box. Hale stared forward through the cockpit glass. 20,000 feet below, Japanese gunners and radar operators traced the bomber formation like it was a blueprint. Orders said maintain perfect formation. Common sense said obey those orders. But survival instinct whispered something else. Shake the equation. Hale closed his eyes. 23 missions, 11 emergency landings, 4 crew funerals. He had followed every order, every time. But today, obeying might kill 200 men. Disobeying might save them. He opened his eyes. Fred, Hale said calmly, bring us 25 feet left. Kilroy blinked. Did I hear 25 left? Kilroy adjusted. Slight descent, Hale added. 10 feet per second. Montero grinned beneath his mask. Skipper's breaking the math. We're just bending it. A heartbeat later, he spoke 4 words that violated Bomber Command doctrine and would have ended his career if anyone survived to report it. Prepare asymmetric formation shift. Kilroy stared, stunned. Hale. This could get us all grounded. Hale looked out over the burning sky, better grounded than buried. And with that, Silver Monarch began the first illegal formation maneuver of the mission, a tiny deviation no human gunner would ever notice. But a deviation a radar computer absolutely would. A deviation that might just save the entire bomber stream. If it worked, if it didn't, no man aboard would live long enough to be court-martialed. March 19th, 1000. 945-7, 2 hours, East China Sea, overcast skies, rough steel-grey swells. Lieutenant Commander Harold Wexler had been through enough gunnery drills to know the rhythm of a ship bracing for impact. There was the tightening of voices, the hurried footsteps, the clatter of helmets, and the tension of hands curling around cold metal. But nothing compared to the silence, that unnatural, suffocating silence that settled across the USS Athena's decks as Combat Information Center reported the same phrase for the 3rd time in 20 minutes. Multiple, unidentified aircraft inbound. Bearing 021. Altitude decreasing. Wexler took a breath, the cold sea air burning his lungs. His ship, the newest Baltimore-class cruiser in the fleet, barely 90 days out of commissioning, was one of the few ships in Task Force 58, equipped with the modified VT, proximity fuse system. The Navy was desperate to field test before the invasion of Okinawa. Every officer aboard knew what that meant. If the fuse failed, they'd be the ones to find out. If it worked, they'd be testifying about it for decades. A young seaman first class sprinted up to him, panting. Sir CIC says they're coming in low. Looks like... He cut himself off as another sailor yelled above the wind. Bogey, count now 12. Correction, 14. Wexler didn't need binoculars. The distant specks emerging from the low cloud deck were unmistakable. The telltale straight-wing silhouettes of Japanese A6M0s, flying impossibly low, hugging the waves to dodge radar detection. Stations, Wexler barked. Traverse and elevation. Keep those barrels sweeping. The proximity-fused 5-inch guns of mounts 51, 52, and 53 rotated in eerie unison. Each shell they'd fire would detonate automatically when it came within a lethal radius of an approaching aircraft. That was the theory. No one aboard Athena had yet seen it in action against a real kamikaze wave, and now they were about to see 14 at once. Aboard Zero Fighter Lieutenant Akihiro Senda 7-5 hours. The ocean below looked like a sheet of hammered lead, shimmering with sharp silver flashes as the morning sun fought its way through clouds. Lieutenant Akihiro Senda steadied his breathing, one hand on the control stick, the other pressed against the photograph pinned inside the cockpit canopy frame, a picture of his younger sister, Hana, smiling awkwardly with the crooked front tooth she'd always been embarrassed about. He traced the corner of the photo with his thumb. "I'm sorry, Hana, but this was the path he had chosen, or perhaps, he thought, the path that had been chosen for him the moment the war reached their small fishing village." The squadron flew low, no more than 10 meters above the waves, their propellers cutting vapor trails through the morning mist. His commander's voice crackled through the radio. "Target sighted. American cruiser-class vessel. Formation Casa, prepare for ascent." Senda swallowed. Up ahead, faint but unmistakable even from distance, were the silhouettes of U.S. warships. The kamikaze manuals had warned them. Cruisers were the most dangerous surface targets in the Pacific because they carried the most effective anti-aircraft systems, short of battleships, and because their fire control radars could lock onto fast-moving aircraft with terrifying accuracy. Somewhere in that formation was a cruiser bristling with unfamiliar antenna shapes, one that intelligence had whispered about, saying the Americans were developing some sort of new fuse that could detonate shells near a plane without needing a direct hit. Superstitions spread like wildfire among the squadrons. Some called it the ghost detonator. Others believed the Americans had learned how to harness lightning inside bullets. Senda did not believe in superstitions. He believed in math. He knew his odds. And he still climbed. 7-8 hours. Range, now 12,000 yards. The fire controlman called over the headset. Target still low. Beginning to ascend. Wexler's stomach dropped. He knew what that meant. Kamikaze pilots always climbed before diving, increasing altitude to convert potential energy into suicidal speed. "Mount 52, Wexler yelled. "Interlock off. Fire when you have tone." Through the thick lens of his Mark 51 director, he watched flashes of sunlight glint off Japanese wingtips as they pulled up into a shallow ascent. The gunnery radarman called out, "Solutions fed. Fuse setting. VT3 beta." This was the moment. The ship's first real battle with proximity fuses. "Open fire." The deck shuddered. BOOM, BOOM, BOOM. 3 5-inch guns belched flame, sending shells screaming into the sky. Every man on deck watched with held breath, waiting to see whether this miraculous new technology would actually work. The first shell streaked between two aircraft. Then, hump. A flash not direct, not impact, a sphere of orange light blooming near 10. The plane lurched. A wing shattered. The fuselage tore sideways, shearing off and tumbling into the sea. A sailor near Wexler shouted in disbelief, "Holy hell, it actually works!" There was no time to celebrate. The remaining 13 planes continued climbing, now beginning to arc into their attack runs. The real storm was coming. 7-10 hours. The first explosion shook Senda's cockpit. It wasn't a direct hit. He had seen plenty of aircraft shredded by 5-inch shells before. No, this was different. The air itself seemed to ignite beside one of his squadron mates, breaking apart his Zero as though invisible hands had crushed it mid-air. Senda's eyes widened. So the rumors were true. The Americans had created a weapon that did not need to hit them. He clenched the control stick harder, sweat beading on his brow despite the cold wind blasting his face through the cockpit vents. Another flash. Another Zero vanished. But they pressed on because they had to. Because turning away was dishonor. Because Japan had run out of options, of fuel, of pilots, of ships, of time. Their commander, Captain Okada, spoke calmly into the radio despite the chaos. "Remember your purpose. Remember who waits for you at home. Aim for the lead cruiser's bridge or funnel. We are the shield of Japan." Senda swallowed hard. He felt no hatred toward the Americans. Only inevitability. 7-12 hours. The second wave of shells burst in perfect, deadly synchrony, each proximity fuse detonating within 70 feet of its target, shredding the air with tungsten fragments. 2 more Zeros spiraled out of the sky, smoking. But the survivors were committed now. At 3,000 yards, they were close enough that Wexler could see faces, goggles, scarves, the determined set of jaws. A surreal moment. Men who intended to die staring at him as his own guns tried to kill them first. Gunner's mate Price yelled over the roar, "Sir, they're lining up for individual runs." The Athena was now target Hay shown the cruiser at the center of the formation, the one whose guns were tearing through the attackers with unnatural efficiency. Wexler sensed the shift in the wind. The Japanese pilots were converging on him personally. 7:13 hours. Sender found himself in the second attack element 4, aircraft maneuvering into a shallow left turn, lining up the broad grey hull of the USS Athena. He could see the gun flashes, now dozens of muzzles, heavy and light, spewing fire into the sky. A stream of tracers lanced beside his canopy. Another round zipped through his right wingtip, peeling away metal like paper. His plane shuddered. But Sender did not break formation. He pushed the nose down slightly, feeling the engine scream as the aircraft accelerated. He was close now, close enough to see sailors scrambling along the deck, close enough to see the ship's superstructure illuminated by its own gunfire. He whispered, "Hana, forgive me." 7:14 hours. 1-0 broke away from the pack, diving steeply, engine screaming, heading straight for Mount 52. Wexler's voice cracked with urgency. "Bring him down. Now!" Mount 52 fired a shell into the path of the incoming plane. It detonated, but the Zero kept coming. It was missing half a wing, its fuselage bleeding smoke, but it was still coming. Wexler saw the pilot, a young man, impossibly young, staring straight ahead, not flinching. "Brace!" Wexler screamed. The Zero slammed into the starboard side, just below the AA deck, erupting in a violent fireball. Men were thrown to the steel deck. Fire licked across torn plates. A machine gunner near Wexler went down, screaming, shrapnel buried deep in his leg. Damage control teams rushed in instantly. "Fire in compartment C3. Hull breach on starboard. Water ingress pump stations online." Wexler pushed himself up, ears ringing. There was no time to process the hit. More were coming. 7:15 hours. Sender saw the explosion. One of his comrades had struck the American cruiser, flames engulfing the starboard side. For a moment, he felt a surge of something like relief, but then he saw the truth. The cruiser was still fighting, still firing, still alive. His stomach tightened. He checked his angle. He had overshot his planned descent path due to turbulence from AA bursts. He corrected. Smoke stung his eyes. His engine sputtered. A fragment of shrapnel must have lodged in the intake. He was losing altitude faster than he intended. But the target was right there. The cruiser's bridge towered in front of him like a grey steel monument. Sender locked onto it. He whispered a final time, "Hana, please live." Well, he pushed the throttle forward. 7:16 hours. Another incoming, bearing 009. The rangefinder operator screamed. Wexler snapped his binoculars upward. A Zero was diving slightly off angle, not straight down, but not level either, struggling, smoke trailing. "Mount 53, left 20 degrees, fire!" 2 shells burst near the plane. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story, but not close enough. Mount 21. Take him. The 40mm Bofors opened up, sending streams of fire arcing beautifully, but the plane was in the blind angle between 2 mounts. Wexler's blood froze. "All hands brace." The plane grew larger, closer, faster. Wexler swore he saw the pilot, just a silhouette through the cracked canopy, nod slightly, almost peacefully. Then, crash! The Zero hit the forward superstructure just below the bridge. The explosion ripped through layers of steel, sending fire and torn bulkheads flying. Men were blown back. The deck twisted. The world became a hurricane of flame, smoke, and metal. Wexler hit the deck hard, vision spinning. He heard distant shouting. "Bridge hit. Captain down. We're losing pressure in the forward fire mains. Radar is out." Wexler forced himself to stand, one hand pressed against a bleeding cut above his right eye. The Athena was wounded. but she was not dead. Sender's consciousness flickered as his aircraft disintegrated around him. The fire spread across the cockpit, his gloves burned, his vision blurred, but he felt no fear now, only release. Only the distant image of Hana smiling. His plane hit the cruiser, and everything went white. 7:20 hours. The last 3 kamikazes, seeing the Athena still afloat and still firing, broke off their attack and plunged toward a destroyer on the edge of the formation instead. They disappeared in streaking arcs of flame and smoke. Silence settled slow, heavy, eerie. Where men had stood minutes ago, there were now torn railings, smoking debris, pools of seawater mixed with blood. Wexler looked across the decks. They had lost friends, but they were still alive, and the ship battered, scorched, bleeding still floated. The proximity fuses had saved them from annihilation. But courage and sacrifice had done the rest. Wexler whispered under his breath, "God, help those boys, even if they were our enemy." Then he turned to his surviving gunners. "Get ready. They'll be back." The sea rolled on. The sky waited for the next wave. The war was far from over. March 19th, 1945, 7:42 hours, East China Sea smoke drifting over the waves. Lieutenant Commander Harold Wexler's uniform smelled of burning insulation, hot metal, and cordite, the scent of a ship recently struck but refusing to go under. Damage control teams worked with controlled fury behind him, spraying foam into smouldering compartments, dragging hoses, and carrying wounded crewmen on stretchers toward the infirmary. The Athena's forward superstructure looked like something had taken a bite out of it. Blackened steel plates curled outward like petals of a dead metal flower. Wexler's throat tightened as he saw the captain's body being lowered from what remained of the bridge. Captain Warren McAllister, the man who drilled them relentlessly for this moment, was gone. A radioman, still coughing from smoke inhalation, approached Wexler. "Sir, Commander Davis says you're the acting CO until a formal chain update." Wexler rubbed the blood-dried cut above his eyebrow. Acting CO. He felt the weight settle over him, heavier than the shrapnel, heavier than the smoke. Men were depending on him now. "Status of the ship?" Wexler asked. The radio man read from a clipboard. "Forward radar offline. Half the 40mm mounts overheated. Starboard hull breach is contained. Pumps holding. Ammunition magazine Alpha is flooding but slow. We can still fire the 5-inch mounts. And propulsion? Engines. 1 and 2 are good. Engine 3 is overheating, but engineering says they can keep her moving. Survive now, evaluate later." "Enemy?" he asked. The radio man swallowed. "Sir, more bogies forming up 60 miles out." Of course they were. The kamikaze attacks always came in waves, relentless, grinding, designed to break the psychological spine of a fleet as much as to sink ships. Wexler stepped up onto the ruined starboard deck. Smoke rose in haunting columns across the task force. A destroyer burned on the horizon. Another cruiser listed heavily, its stern low in the water. He whispered to himself, "We're not done. Not yet." March 19th, 1945, 7:45 hours. Preparation. Hangar 2, Captain Takeshi Mori, commander of the 7th Shinpu Squadron, stood before 16 young men seated on crates, ammunition boxes, and overturned fuel drums. They ranged from battle-hardened veterans to boys barely old enough to shave. Outside, mechanics worked furiously to ready more Zero and Key 43 Oscar aircraft for sorties. The air smelled of engine oil, exhaust, and the bitter smoke of incense sticks burning at a small shrine, a quiet, desperate prayer in a war moving toward collapse. Mori held a clipboard, though he knew every name by heart. He looked at the men, some staring back with hollow acceptance, others trying to hide trembling hands, a few smiling bravely, pretending this was an honor rather than a last march. He began, "Brothers, the first wave has struck the American fleet. The second wave is assembling now. Our target is the enemy cruiser group." A murmur. They all knew cruisers were suicide times 2. One pilot, barely 18, raised his hand timidly. "Sir, is it true the Americans have a new type of shell, one that explodes without hitting?" Maury paused. The truth mattered now. "Yes," he admitted, "the Americans have improved their defenses." He looked into their eyes. "What you face is more deadly than anything before." He let that sink in. Then he continued, softer. "You will be flying not for victory, but for time. Every hour we delay the Americans is one more hour our families can evacuate, one more hour our engineers can build rockets, one more hour for Japan to breathe." He saw one pilot clench his fists, another nod slowly. Then he said the line he always said, the line drilled into every kamikaze crew. "Your bodies are bullets. Your hearts are warheads. Your names will be remembered." Across the base, the wail of an air raid siren briefly sounded not an attack, but a signal. "Planes ready. Runways clear." Maury stepped back. "Prepare for sortie." 16 men bowed. 16 men stood. 16 men walked toward their planes, never to return. March 19th, 1945 10 hours. Wexler's makeshift command post was now the secondary bridge, a cramped steel-walled compartment filled with wiring bundles and emergency control stations. It was not designed for full combat command, but necessity didn't ask for permission. Operations Officer Lieutenant Keane handed him fresh intel. "Sir, Task Force 58 wide radar confirms a second wave of inbound aircraft. Big one." "How many?" "Minimum of 24. Wexler exhaled sharply. 24 against a fleet already bleeding. "What direction?" he asked. "Grid bearing 127, straight from Kyushu." Of course they were coming from Kyushu. That was the hornet's nest. Wexler braced his hands on a steel table. "We still have 3 operational 5-inch mounts," Keane said. "VT fuses intact on all remaining shells. And the Bofors? Some overheated, some jammed, some intact. We've got enough to fight." Wexler nodded. "Not good enough to survive? Maybe, but enough to fight." He turned to the comms operator. "Broadcast to the task force. Athena is combat capable. Assign us center escort position." The operator hesitated. "Sir? That puts us in the dead center. We'll be the primary target." Wexler stared at him, with unwavering intensity. "Athena is built for that, and if we don't take center, the carriers will." Silence. Then, "Aye, sir. 8:17 hours airborne. Heading east." Captain Maury flew ahead in his aging Mitsubishi, a 6M0, the engine roaring despite the strain of patched cylinders and unbalanced propeller blades. Behind him, 16 aircraft formed 2 staggered lines, a V-shaped assault wedge honed by desperation, not design. The sea appeared ahead like a vast slate of grey-green glass. Maury's radio crackled. "Commander, I can't stop thinking about my mother." It was pilot trainee Kenjiro, the youngest in the squadron. Maury answered gently. "Your mother knows you are fighting for her peace." Another voice cut in Sergeant Wakahisa, older, hardened. "Kenjiro, your mother will remember you with pride. Do not fear." Silence followed. Heavy. Final. Maury scanned the horizon. Smoke rose far ahead, a faint black smudge. The American fleet. He raised his voice over the radio. "Brothers, open your hearts. The enemy is near. 8:31 hours. Contact. Multiple contacts. Altitude high, descending fast." The CIC erupted with overlapping voices. Radar technicians marked the incoming blips with grease pencils on the plotting board. Wexler stepped forward. "How many?" "Looks like 24, sir." He closed his eyes, then opened them with steel resolve. "All stations, general quarters. All hands to battle positions. Prepare to repel air attack." The ship's klaxon blared 3 rising tones. Across the vessel, men scrambled, some limping, some bandaged, some coughing smoke from their lungs, but all ready. The sea fell eerily silent as every gun mount locked into position. Wexler grabbed the intercom and spoke shipwide. This is acting Captain Wexler. We stopped them once. We will stop them again. Do your duty. For your ship. For each other. He replaced the handset. Moments later, bogies now visible. Wexler rushed to the observation port. He saw them. 16 Zeros descending in a perfect V formation, sunlight glinting off their canopies, smoke trailing behind several engines. The wave was coming. 8:37 hours, there the fleet. Great black columns of smoke rose from at least 3 vessels. Ships maneuvered in defensive circles, flak bursts erupting around them like black blossoms. Maury raised his altitude, giving his men room to dive. "Remember your targets," he said calmly. "Attack with purpose." As he spoke, a distant flash lit up the side of an American destroyer. Another flash, the proximity fuses. Even from here he could see them spheres of orange light exploding near planes, detonations suspended in mid-air without direct hits. He felt a knot twist in his chest. He spoke softly. "Whatever happens, you fly bravely." Then he pushed his throttle to full. "All units dive." 8:38 hours. All guns open fire. The Athena roared. BOOM, BOOM, BOOM. The 5-inch guns unleashed their fury shells, streaking skyward, each with a tiny radio heart waiting to sense an aircraft's presence. Hump! A shell detonated near the lead Zero. Fragmentation tore through its wing. The plane flipped violently and burst apart in mid-air. Dozens of AA mounts fired simultaneously, the sky turning into a cage of steel. Yet the enemy kept coming. A Zero clipped by shrapnel spiraled down and slammed into the waves, but another 2 filled the gap instantly. Wexler yelled into the headset. "Mount 51, adjust 1 degree port. They're lining up on the center column." The sky became chaos. 1 Zero broke apart beside the cruiser, showering the deck with debris. Another burst into flame from a burst of 40mm fire, but they were too many. 8:39 hours. Maury's cockpit shook violently, flak exploding on all sides. His right wing was punctured. Smoke entered the cabin. Still, he dove. He saw the cruiser, the same one still burning from earlier hits. The same ship whose guns carved entire squadrons out of the sky. The Athena. Her deck guns spit fire upward relentlessly. Maury's vision tunneled. He lined up the bridge tower, or what remained of it. One last flight, he told himself. One last push. He tightened his grip on the controls. "For Japan!" he shouted. He dove steeper. 8:40 hours. "Incoming! Dead ahead!" A Zero was streaking toward them faster than the others, diving almost vertically. Wexler recognized it immediately. "The lead plane. Bring him down." Mount 53 fired 3 rapid shots. Too late. The Zero was seconds away. Wexler dove behind a steel bulkhead. CRAASH, but the explosion came not from Athena. The kamikaze struck the sea 10 yards short of the hull, blown off course by a perfectly timed proximity burst that detonated just close enough to tilt the aircraft's angle at the last possible second. Water blasted over the bow. Shrapnel pinged against the deck. But the ship lived. Wexler stood, breath heaving. That was the leader. "Lieutenant," Keane said quietly. "He almost had us." Wexler nodded. "We're still here." But the attack wasn't over. 4 more Zeros were diving. 8:40 hours. Kenjiro gripped his stick, tears blurring his vision. His engine sputtered, hit by flak. His instruments were failing. "Mother, forgive me." He aimed not for the bridge, but for the center deck. He whispered, "I'm not afraid anymore." And dove. 8:41 hours. "Take him now!" Wexler screamed. Mount 52 fired detonation. The Zero erupted into a fireball, fragments raining across the sea. Another dove toward the port side hit by Bofor's fire. It exploded mid-air. Another spiraled away after its wing snapped. Finally, silence. Just the crackle of fires, the hiss of steaming metal, the groans of a wounded ship refusing to die. The second wave was beaten back. 2 hours. A radio operator bowed his head. "Sir." None from the 7th Squadron have returned. General Sato closed his eyes. Prepare the 8th. The war demanded more lives. Time was running out. 9-10 hours. Wexler stood on the scorched deck, watching smoke drift into the grey morning sky. Around him, exhausted sailors slumped against railings. Medics worked silently. Damaged guns smoked. He whispered, "We're alive." But he knew the truth. They had survived 2 waves. A third would kill them. And the Japanese weren't finished, not by a long shot. The funeral detail played out at sea under a bruised sunset, the sky streaked purple and orange like the last flare rounds of a vanished battle. The Athena steamed at 5 knots, slow enough that the ocean seemed reluctant to let her pass. Sailors who had spent the morning hosing blood from the teak deck now stood in dress, whites, silent, the fabric still smelling faintly of smoke. Lieutenant Commander Harold Wexler stood front and centre beside the flag-draped shrouds. He kept his posture rigid, but his hands trembled barely, almost imperceptibly, but he felt it. These were his men. Men he'd asked to trust his judgment. Men who had stood behind him while 32 screaming kamikazes tried to tear their cruiser apart. Men who didn't flinch. The chaplain's voice drifted out over the water, a calm counterpoint to the dull throb of the Athena's engines. For greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. A gust of wind threatened to snatch the words away before they could sink in. It carried with it the sharp scent of burning oil from the night before, still rising from distant patches of floating debris. The Pacific had not yet forgotten. Wexler swallowed hard. He wanted to speak. He wanted to tell the families of the dead that their sons had stood against impossible odds and held, that they had not run, not broken, not hesitated, not once. But anything he said would fracture his composure, and he knew the crew needed him to stay whole, at least for now. One by one, the bodies were released, slipping into the sea with soft splashes. Each splash hit Wexler harder than the last valve that had detonated against the starboard side. When the final shroud vanished below the surface, the boatswain mate piped the end of ceremony. The sound was sharp, thin, and final. The ship returned to general quarters drills 2 hours later, not out of necessity, but out of discipline. The Navy had a saying, "A crew that keeps busy doesn't break apart," and Wexler could already see the strain in their eyes. Down in CIC, radar operator Ensign Carver was still checking the PPI screen every 10 seconds, even when there was nothing to track. "Sir, I keep hearing engine whines," he admitted, voice hoarse. "Like they're diving again." "They're not," Wexler said, but he heard them too. Phantom echoes. The kind that don't stop when the shooting does. Sonar techs reported tapping noises they couldn't identify. Stern gunners said they caught themselves flinching every time a wave slapped the hull. Even the cooks were jumpy. One dropped a tray of metal ladles, and half the mess hall ducked like another bomb was incoming. The Athena's scars were visible. Twisted railing, blackened gun tubs, a starboard bulkhead that looked like a giant fist had punched it inward. But the deeper scars, the ones carved into the crew, weren't so easy to see. 2 days later, Admiral Spruance himself sent a message. Athena's performance against mass strike exemplary. Crew courage noted. Commendations will follow. The message was read over the intercom. Some cheered. Some cried. Some felt nothing at all. Wexler simply folded the paper, slid it into his pocket, and went out to the weather deck. The Pacific was calm today, a rare gift. The water sparkled gold under the early morning sun, deceptively peaceful, as if the ocean were trying to apologize for what it had taken. He rested his hands on the warm railing. 32, he murmured. And we're still here. He didn't say it triumphantly. He said it like a question, like he was still trying to understand why they'd survived when so many others hadn't. A soft voice behind him answered, "Because they needed us to, sir." It was Carver, pale, exhausted, but standing tall. Wexler nodded slowly. Maybe that was reason enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.